Hey, welcome to Kickin' It with Krystal, Travel Diaries of a Goddess. I'm your host, Krystal The Goddess, and welcome to another episode where we discuss different travel experiences between me and a few friends. I also talk about travel optimization, aka travel hacking, and I'll throw in a few life shenanigans along the way. You know, living life as a goddess. Now, let's get into it, yeah, hey, get into it, yeah, hey, get into it, yeah. Hey, I'm Krystal The Goddess, and welcome to my podcast, Kicking It with Krystal, Travel Diaries of a Goddess. I am Krystal, a world traveler, an entrepreneur, a holistic healer, and a whole goddess out here, okay? And welcome to my diary. So today I just want to talk about why I started traveling in the first place, okay? I don't know. I feel like as a child, I always definitely was like, I want to go to Paris. It's the place for love. You know, you're supposed to be married by 25, 2 kids. I had 2 kids. I had twin boys. I had 2 dogs, 2 Rottweilers. Like my dream life was planned, right? And I just wanted to travel. And the only place I can really remember thinking about was Paris. Like, I don't know. I just want to go to Paris, Eiffel Tower. Why? Because we're told to glamorize all things Europe, right? All things European culture. But more recently, I met a man. And not so recent today, but recent in my life, right? I met a man and he was more into not that he was more into, but he was more familiar with Africa culture, how Christianity was born from, Egyptians and the temples and all just so many things. And so he told me about someone he used to follow, not used to follow because he still follows them, but someone who he enjoys watching lecture, which is Ashwa Kwesi, right? And Mariwa Kwesi, husband and wife. But these are 2 Kemetologists who have been studying ancient Kemet, which is ancient Egypt, for years. And I remember him telling me, this guy, he takes these trips every year. They're educational trips, intellectual trips. You'll learn a lot. And I remember him telling me, I want to take my son. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. That's interesting. And so I remember before when Honey and I were getting serious, when we were getting serious, and before we moved into our home, we were going to do one last, kind of hurrah with our boys before we became a unit officially under one roof. And so I was planning a trip with my son. He was planning a trip with his son, and his trip was to go to Egypt. He wanted to take his son to Egypt. And so I wanted to take my son, but I did not want to intrude on their trip. So me and my son, we ended up going to the Bahamas on a Disney cruise. My son was 4 at the time. So we went on a Disney cruise, and his trip actually didn't end up happening because it was a lot of money. And the time came too fast, I'm assuming, but his trip didn't happen. And so as we stayed together, we started thinking about, I brought up one day, about that trip, I want to go. What makes you think I don't want to take my son to Africa? My son Black, no. But it seriously was I want to go too. Number one, I want to go to Africa because I remember when I promise I don't want all episodes to get into religion or anything like that. But I remember, for me, going back to Africa is connected to religion for me, because when I first began to question Christianity, I remember I would say I'm in limbo. I'm not here nor there, but I would always say I want to know what my ancestors believed. I want to know what my ancestors studied, because where is Team Catch Flights, Not Feelings? I'm looking for y'all. Shop our Global Goddess tees right now so that you can rep Team Catch Flights, or perhaps it's Team Getting Passport Stamps. Perhaps it's Team Can't Do It, Got a Flight Booked. Whatever team you want, if you in the sky, shop this tee. See you there. Bye. Because as far as I'm concerned, Christianity was brought here and taught to enslaved Black people by the European slave owners. And that was my understanding. I could still be wrong. This is just my understanding. I never went back to look. My understanding is good enough for me. I don't really care what the reality is. I'm perfectly fine with that. But I remember, like, for me, I just kept saying, you know, like, I'm just in limbo. Like, I'm trying to wait. I want to know more about my ancestors. And at that moment, it didn't necessarily mean like I'm going back to Egypt or to Africa. It just meant like I need to get my head in a book and learn a little bit more about my culture. That's what it was for me. So when this opportunity presented itself, where Honey was like, yo, like, you know, there's this trip to Egypt. And I'm like, dang, how much does it cost, right? And so, of course, me being me, I'm a researcher by heart, by nature. And so I started to do some research and I was like, yo, I think we can make this happen. Like, if this is the total for all of us, for 4 people, I said, you cover half of it, I'll cover half of it, because that's just the type of girl I am. It don't bother me. Y'all can keep arguing over who's paying half the bill, who's paying all the bill. I don't really care. One thing about Krystal, if she want to do it, she's going to do it. And if that means I'm putting up money, I'm doing what I need to do. I don't care about any of that stuff. So I was like, you put up half, I'll put up half, because your half will cover you and your son, my half will cover me and my son. And then that way, you know, it's not too much money. The trip alone per person was over $4,000. And so we had to pay for 2 people. I got a small discount because my son was younger at the time, but it was still almost $4,000. Like, that's still a lot of money. And then we had to fly out of New York. So we had to pay for flights to New York. And then we paid for hotels in New York to fly out of New York. And then on the way back, we made a trip out of New York because I had never been to New York and my son had never been to New York. So we needed more money to fund a New York trip, right? But anyways, I digress, like I do. But for me, like, that's where that all stemmed. And like I said, I went to the Bahamas in 2017. I went to the Bahamas on a Disney cruise. And before that, my very first trip was I was in middle school. And my mom got, someone else we know had a timeshare. And they like gifted her a trip to Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. And that was the very first like international trip that I did, was Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. And I just remember seeing the arch. I remember eating ceviche on the beach. I remember doing a glass bottom boat excursion. And I mean, I'm this big age, you know, in my 30s right now, officially in my 30s. But I'm in my 30s right now, and that's still my first trip. And I remember so much of it. If I were to see that hotel today, I would remember like I was here. I remember there were tennis courts. I used to play tennis as a child, so I remember the tennis courts. I remember there was a Category 5 hurricane. I remember them sliding the notes under the door that said like, here's how we prepare for a hurricane. Here's what you need to do to be safe in the hurricane. All the go in the bathroom, get away from the windows, go in the bathtub. I remember all that stuff. I remember going to downtown Cabo San Lucas, and there was a mall, and the mall was really empty. It was like a bunch of stores, but like they weren't open, like nothing was in there. I remember being like on the second level, or I don't know, but we were not on the first floor. I remember being up some level, and then I remember walking the streets. I remember the older Mexican women with their braids, and they had their books trying to braid our hair. Like, I remember so much of this. And for me, it was never like go back to Mexico. Like, it wasn't that, but just the fact of like, I've been here, right? I think the arch, and you go to the arch and there's like a beach behind the arch and there's like seals, right? And our sea lions, I'm pretty sure they were seals. And it was just all of that. I was like, ooh, I love that. Being on that glass bottom boat for the first time and seeing all the fish under there, like that really stuck with me. That was, I would say, is my favorite part, the glass bottom boat experience. Obviously, between that and braids, getting your hair braided by a Mexican woman and going to an empty mall, obviously. I mean, like, what are you going to choose as your favorite part? But one thing about my parents, and like now we're going back to like what kind of, in my mind, I'm thinking about like, okay, so what started this love for travel? And so that was like the international part, the Africa and the Egypt part of like, that's what stemmed it. And I'm going to go back to that. But in my mind, I was like, let's go back to the beginning, right? My very first international trip was Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And that was my first international trip. But my family, we are trippers. Like, road trips, please. I have family. I'm in Los Angeles. We have family in Sacramento, Santa Barbara, family in Mississippi. It was nothing. Like, we would drive to Sacramento every Thanksgiving. So every November, I remember the fall leaves. I love it. Going fishing with my uncles and my dad. Like, we would do that. And then even as I got older, my parents got their own timeshare way after the Mexico timeshare. But we would go to San Diego every summer. We would go to Vegas every winter, every New Year's for a couple years. We went to Lake Tahoe once, I think, but it was in the midst of all of that. And I remember we went to like Lake Tahoe, and then we came back for a few days, and then we went to Vegas because that was our thing for New Year's. So we did all of that in the winter. But like freaking San Diego, freaking New Year's, those were annual trips. Like my family made sure we got out. And my parents had 4 daughters. I'm the oldest of 4 daughters. So this is not the cheapest thing to do, right? But I remember like San Diego, we would do SeaWorld, right? Every year. Or then we started to do like Legoland. But I just remember going places. I remember like, you couldn't tell me we were lower class. You could not, like, I'm just now realizing like maybe my parents didn't have all this money. Like, and even still, I'm like, were we lower class, but like the high end of lower class? Or were we middle class with the low end of middle class? Like to this day, I still can't tell you. You know, my parents didn't have fancy jobs and they had 4 kids. So, like when they were together, they had a home, in Compton. And I just never had to want or need for anything. Anything I wanted, I could get, but I balanced that out by saying like, I wasn't a super needy kid. Like I didn't want to ask for much, right? But going back to the travel, it was like, I just remember going places. I remember just thinking, or at least growing up feeling like it was normal. It was normal to get in a car. I remember the first time we drove to Mississippi. It was my grandmother's funeral. It was like 3 days. There was like 3 vans, like back when vans were a thing. I don't even think I see vans anymore. But there were 3 vans. So it was like my family and then like my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, like 3 or 4 vans. And we caravanned. I remember stopping at rest stops, right? Like, and not being like, ew, like, no, like I said, my parents, they didn't have any boys. So none of us mind getting dirty, like playing around, things like that. But if I really have to think about like where my love for travel started or where the seeds were planted, I would say like as a child, travel was a part of my life. I've been traveling. The youngest trip that I can remember is 5th grade when we drove to Mississippi. And I know for a fact that was not my first trip. Because like I said, my family used to drive to Sacramento every year. And it's funny because if you think about like my sisters, there's pictures of us in Sacramento and she's like 3. So it's like this girl has like evidence of her traveling at a young age. I can't remember seeing any pictures, but I'm like, I know my family didn't just start going to visit their family when I became of age to remember, But it's interesting when you really think back, like, no, travel in the sense of like to get out of your hometown, right? To get away from your city. We've been traveling. And I love that for me. And I love that for my family. And I'm very fortunate that my parents, and I don't know if it has to do more with like the fact that our family was just so spread out that like part of it at the beginning was going to see family. Okay, we're going to Sacramento to see family. Going to Santa Barbara to see family. We're going to Mississippi to see family. Like a lot of that was just family stuff. And then maybe I guess as my parents developed a family of their own, and that's super cute. Aww. But as my parents grew their own family, we started to have our own traveling traditions. Hey. Calling all the goddesses out there, the goddesses who are just now realizing the goddess energy that lives within, and the goddesses who have known all along. Yes, hey goddess, it's Krystal, the goddess here, the creator and host of the House of Divinity podcast. I'm a holistic healer, a certified Kemetic Reiki practitioner, and your goddesshood guide, here to be of assistance on your journey through goddesshood. The way parents have parenthood and adults have adulthood. You get what I'm saying? So, on the House of Divinity podcast, join us for divine discussions where we'll discuss several different aspects of living life as your most divine goddess self through your mind, body, and spirit. We'll discuss ways to raise your vibration, activate and align your chakras, and stay tuned in and harness your divine goddess energy. If it's going to help you navigate life on earth at full goddess potential, we're gonna talk about it. Sometimes it'll just be you and I having a divine discussion. Other times we'll be joined by other holistic healers to share their holistic practices and knowledge. So, are you ready to ascend and live life at your full goddess potential? Tune in every week wherever you listen to your podcast, and find us on social media at House of Divinity by KTG. That stands for House of Divinity by Krystal The Goddess. And go ahead and like, follow, and subscribe. See you there. Bye. And I don't know, like my mom is no longer in this realm. She has transitioned, and I don't necessarily talk to my father, but I'm curious on like, that would be a beautiful conversation if I could have that with my parents. I wish I could ask my mom, like, what started travel for you? Like, what made you want to travel? And why was it important for you to create these family traditions of travel? Because look what you started. Like, and I'm not gonna blame you and say like in a bad way, because I love this. Because there's people now, they're like, I have never left LA. I remember one of my cousins, she's 2 years older than me. We were in our younger 20s, and I remember her saying like she had never been to Vegas. I'm like, girl, Vegas is next door. What are you talking about? Like, what do you mean never been to Vegas? Like, what are you waiting on, you know? But that just wasn't her thing. And we were cousins. We grew up we went to elementary school together. She was always 2 years ahead of me. We went to middle school together, again, 2 years ahead of me. High school, we didn't go together, but my family was very close-knit in the sense of like all the grandkids stayed at grandma and grandpa's house. So I don't know if you grew up that way as well, but like we all stayed together. And so for me, it's interesting that we grew up so close in the same house a lot of our lives, because after school, we always went to grandma's house and grandpa's house. But that for her, it wasn't the same. It was like, I'm like, girl, you don't need nothing, nobody to go to Vegas. Just go, you know? And you have cheap options if money is an issue. Like I don't know. I'm at a point now too, and I guess maybe then, but more so now where I'm like, just do it to do it. Do it to get it over with. Like, it's just Vegas. Like, let's go. I'm sure by now, and I'm pretty sure she's been to Vegas by now. But I was just so shocked, and I was like, what do you mean you never been to Vegas? It's 5 hours. And then I moved to Vegas, and I lived there for 2 years. So I'm really like, girl, just go. That was after the fact. But anyways, I just kind of wanted to talk about why I created this channel or this podcast. And I wanted to talk about where my traveling bug stemmed from, right? And what else did we cover? We covered my first international trip I ever took in my life. We covered where traveling came from. And then I went back to like as adulthood, the Egypt trip kind of sparked my traveling as an adult and my international travel. Because so when we were in Egypt, I literally had moments where I'm talking to Honey and I'm like, yo, like we really did it. Like we brought our boys to Africa. We brought our boys to the mainland, to the homeland. Like we brought our boys home. Like I was just so like fulfilled. Like, babe, we did it. Mama made it. Like we really did that, you know? And so having all those moments when we were there, and then when we came back, it was like, wow, we really took our boys to Africa. And so when people are always asking me like, how was Africa? How was Egypt? I'm like, it's surreal. It's still wild to me that the pyramids were right in front of me. Like as grand, there's a better word I want to use, but I'm not going to fuck it up. But as grand as that is, like, it was mind-blowing to walk up on the pyramids, because you're walking this long trail and it's so far away and it's huge from far away, and you get closer and it's huge. It gets huger. No, it gets bigger as you get closer, and you're just there and you're like, wow, right? But I talked about that already in a different episode, that first feeling. So definitely check out that podcast episode of Travel Vlog Part 1 of Egypt, which is in Cairo. Check that podcast out. I go into details about that experience. But what Egypt taught me when we got back, after I like let it marinate that we really did that, like it really happened, Honey and I, we were just talking, and what that really taught me was like, that's easy. It was so easy to get out this country. It was so easy to get a passport stamp. It was so easy to take our boys to another country. It was so easy to show our boys another part of the world. It was so easy to show our boys life outside of LA. It was so easy to show our boys life outside of America. Because one thing about it, two things for sure, I'm going to be living in somebody else's country at some point in my life. And that's very important to me. And I want our boys to know, and we want our boys to know that, like, there's more to life than LA. There's more to life than, you don't have to stay here. You're not married to this place. You're not anchored to the soil here. This place don't love you. You can go find somewhere that does, or somewhere that's not going to give you as many problems. And so to know that, like, I'm an educator. So when I tell y'all I backwards planned that thing, I backwards planned Egypt. It was like, okay, it's going to cost, I think our number we settled on was $10,000, right? Total. We needed $4,000 per person to go on the 15-day trip to Egypt with Asher Crazy and his wife. So $4,000 per person average. That was $8,000. And then we're like, okay, we want to spend some time in New York. We're going to need food. We're going to need hotels, whatever. So we'll save $10,000. That was the goal. So I was like, all right, we have $10,000 we need to save. Half for you, half for me, $5,000 each. How there was like a year. So I broke it down, 5,000 divided by 12 months, boom. This is how much we need to save a month in order to make it happen. I was like, babe, do you think you can do that? He's like, yeah, I should be able to do that. Bet, let's do it. It was really that simple, y'all. I gave him a number. I gave him the breakdown, and he was like, and it was just a question. Do you think we could do it? When he said yes, I said say less. And that's what we did. And so we just started saving money every month. I put my money in a separate account. He moved his money into like a separate account that we like basically ignored. And then we had the money, which was great. But we had a few hiccups, like the pandemic happened. So then you couldn't even go that year anyway that we were planning to go. Let me see, something else had happened where we weren't going to be able to go. Something regarding the son. He didn't have his shit together. So he wasn't going to be able to go. And my honey was like, well, the whole point that I want to go, not the whole point, but a major point is to take him. He's like, I don't want to go without him. And I know so many people are like, just leave him. He didn't have his shit together. Just leave him. That wasn't the point of the trip. The point of the trip was that we wanted to take our boys, our sons, to Africa. So for me, I understood, right? Like, okay, your son can't go this year. He don't got his shit together. We're going to go next year. And so I was so happy in a bad way. And it may sound bad, but like I was so happy that like the pandemic happened and nobody went. Nobody can go anywhere. Because then I didn't feel left out because I really wanted to go. And I was ready to go. And honey was ready to go. But that also, like we had the money saved, but it also allowed us to like spend the money if we needed it and still have time to like recoup the money. So it was pretty amazing to know that like all you need is a plan. All I really needed was a plan, and my plan made it happen. And so now to this day, but now I'm just like, how much is it? Honestly, y'all, I don't even be planning like that no more. I just be looking up flights, cheap flight, book it. That's all I really be doing. I don't even backwards plan no more. I just look at flights. And that's how I get on all these trips. But I think this is a great place to end this episode. So thank y'all for tuning in to Kicking It with Krystal, my travel diaries of a goddess. And just remember, life is meant to be enjoyed, okay? So go out there and experience it, even if you have to do it scared. Until next time, until next episode, I'll see you later. Bye. All right. Thank you all so much for joining me on this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you'd like to join me on my next goddess retreat, make sure you click the link below. We're going to Costa Rica. Reserve your spot today. Also, if you'd like to purchase the Global Goddess Guide, that link will also be below. And if you want to rep some merch, definitely check out the link below. All the links are below. Also, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our travel vlogs on YouTube so that you can see everything that I'm talking about here. Thanks for tuning in. I love and appreciate y'all. I hope you have a magical day.